We face complex, intersecting crises that cross borders and generations. If we are to address these challenges and build a better world, amplifying the voices of those on the front lines and sharing understandings across cultures and geographies is critical. Storytelling is one of the best tools that we have to do that. My name is Marina Melanidis, and I am the founder and partnerships director of Youth for Nature. I'm also one of the team of folks that put this following session together. Over the next 40 to 50 minutes or so, we're going to listen to storytellers who are really leveraging the power of narrative to help build critical and underrepresented perspectives to the forefront of the environmental movement. We will hear from Kate, who's the creative director of Loam, which is a community of compassionate and creative activists who are doing everything from publishing vibrant print publications to facilitating immersive workshops in order to build a better world through art. We will hear from Kynan, who's a 16-year-old Indigenous filmmaker, specifically Dayak Iban from Sungai, Utik, West Kalimantan in Indonesia, pursuing his passion for photography, videography, and nature to amplify voices. We will hear from David Hernandez Palmar, who is from the Wanjiru people from Venezuela and Colombia, and is a filmmaker, independent curator, and film programmer who has done everything from directing to producing films to curating Indigenous film festivals in Latin America. And we will hear from Elizabeth Wanjiru Wathuti, a young nature and climate activist and environmental campaigner in Kenya who founded the Green Generation Initiative and is building and nurturing young environmentalists in her community. Join us as we explore how to best amplify voices, build audiences, and steward justice-grounded narratives necessary to foster intersectional solutions.
Thank you so much again for being here today, Kate. And I wanted to tell us a little bit about the work that you want to do / the future you want to build with Loam magazine.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, just a little bit about Loam. We're a community organization that produces environmental media that explores issues of resilience and regeneration and rematriation. And alongside Loam editor Kylea Frederick and Loam Listen podcast host Emilio Freeman, that honor the intersections of creativity and community care and climate justice. So we really envision a future where art is honored as a valid mode of social change and sparking a culture shift. And we're super passionate about connecting with community and coming from a place of embodied action.
I love that. I think that most of the times when we're doing any type of climate work or just environmental work, it requires a lot of bodily actions and just movement. And how do we really navigate those conversations that just necessarily result in in ourselves to dedicate time for ourselves of how we move about that. So thank you about that. So I guess I wanted to ask a very interesting question is, how do you think the modern environmental movement falls short when it comes to storytelling, and most specifically, I think, with climate justice storytelling?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think something I see is seeing storytelling as supplementary instead of seeing storytelling as foundational. And I really feel like storytelling is incredibly humanizing. It's an opportunity to truly embody inclusivity and intersectionality in how we're approaching this work. And yeah, I often struggle with the fact that art and storytelling, whether that's through the medium of film or painting or whatever, is so often relegated to the sidelines, or it's seen as extra, like it's an act of adornment. And I think it's integral, it's foundational, it's elemental, and storytelling needs to be at the root of any design process or systems thinking surrounding how we communicate messages and spark change.
Definitely. I often seen that sometimes art and creativity can be seen as siloed in the sense of environmental storytelling.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most beautiful things that I love about Loam magazine is that it really encompasses the intersections between art, nature, and humans. And I think that when we're trying to kind of give ourselves more visual descriptions of how to storytell and give us that humanizing effect, many of what I've seen in recording for climate storytellings often is either in manuscripts or text, and sometimes that visual aspect is needed to really strive that creativity in one's own process, or even to really reconnect those roots with their own narrative.
Totally. And to your point as well, I mean, storytelling, like you were saying, it's an active imagination. And we, in order to imagine better and differently, in order to imagine a world that's more just and more beautiful, we need to be able to first visualize that. And I think art can play an incredibly important role in being that bridge into imagination.
Definitely. I 100% agree. And I think that many, as we continue seeing the ecological crisis begin to a little bit become a little bit more dire for a lot of communities, it's so important that we kind of build the bridge between a lot of crafters, creatives, environmentalists, scientists, to understand that we're all interconnected in this movement. And I guess one of the things that I've definitely have seen a lot in media is these kind of climate doom storytellings of saying like, it's over, or we continuously lose rapid environment, ecological spaces, icebergs, communities being flooded. So how do we tell stories of hope that are more compelling than the dominant narratives that is generally dominated by the media, that kind of not necessarily scares the person, but educates you in saying that it's getting worse?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really interesting. Hope is a tricky term for me. I will say what I think is important is advancing narratives that make space for multiplicity and nuance. I think doom and gloom is not the full truth. I think hope is not the full truth. I think there's something far more nuanced that exists both in between and beyond those two poles of thinking. And I think that's something that's so integral to Loam and the work we do is multiplicity is really one of our guiding values. There's so many different ways to tell a story. There's so many people who have the power to be storytellers, and may not fit into like mainstream definitions of what a storyteller looks like. And so for us, coming back to nuance and multiplicity, that's what I think makes a narrative compelling and has the capacity to spark change, is when it holds space for different ways of being and perceiving and thinking. And I think one thing that has been coming up a lot in environmental spaces is a real purity test for who belongs and who doesn't. And I think that limits our imagination, that limits who's involved. There are a lot of people who are embodying the work, but might not use a certain term to describe their work, that would be used in a mainstream space, right? There's just a vast number of ways we can approach and think about this. And I think it's so important to hold space for that. And one last thing I'll say to that is, I feel like in my own work, sometimes I get frustrated because I'll encounter people who are like, I give up, it's over, I'm done. Which to me just feels like another way to reaffirm the status quo, because it's brave and scary and heartbreaking to imagine better and to try for better. And I also see people who have put their trust in others that change will happen instead of affirming their own locus of control, and then also aren't taking action. And so it feels so important to remind people to remember that the world exists in multiple planes, that we're walking constantly between multiple worlds, between the past and the present and the future. And we really have a beautiful obligation and responsibility to show up for these different ways of being, to show up for the grief, but also to show up for what's good and what's growing, and to hold it all and to bear witness to it all and to honor it all. So yeah, that feels really important to what we're trying to do.
That is so beautiful. And I think that, as you mentioned, it's a blossoming experience where we need to approach these issues of storytelling with the incorporations of grief, loss, memories. We have all of these unique experiences, and not to say that climate storytelling should all be about hope, because then it can often be misleading or perpetuate this toxic positivity narrative that we sometimes see in media. that to acknowledge those experiences, but to know that anyone around you or people around you will still experience the same emotions that you may experience, and that following themes of like decomposition or composting, I think that everything that we take into this earth will eventually end back into the earth and be recycled back. And so we will see this regenerative movement of climate storytellers happening throughout the whole time that this planet has been alive for. So thank you so much. And I guess the last question to give our audience about is, where can people follow and support the work of Loam, and what is the future for Loam?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find us at Loam Love on Instagram. Our website is loamlove.com. And next year, it's so hard now to speak to the future of Loam, because this year has been a beautiful reminder that we don't know how to, plan for what will be. But next year, all of 2020 will be devoted to rematriation, to decomposition, to dismantling, and to the cycle between birth and death. And our podcast and our annual magazine and all of our publications are going to be exploring these issues in greater depth. And we're really, really excited to explore that with our community. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much again, Kate, for being on this. And I think that many of us will continue to diversify our own climate storytelling.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, Kynan. Thanks so much for coming today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to jump into this conversation and learn a little bit more. Let's get started. What drew you to filmmaking and photography?
I guess from a young age, I've been exposed to a lot of filmmakers, because so many people came to our village, to Sungai Utik, to record and to document our story. And from there is how I was first exposed to filmmaking. And I guess that sort of inspired me in a way that, like, these people, they've come from a really, really far place to our village to record us, to tell our story. So I thought, like, why don't we tell our own story in our own way?
Yeah. And what are some of the key barriers or challenges maybe have you faced as a young filmmaker and trying to tell your own stories?
Personally, it's very difficult, because there's not a lot of people that are very interested in this. So for most of my films, I work on it myself. I recorded myself and edited all myself. So I guess the solution to that would be to get more people to be interested in this. Especially here, it's so important, because most of the population in the town where I'm at right now is indigenous people. And I think it would really benefit all of us if more people was to document our culture, our stories, basically. Yeah.
And how do you think we can do that? That's something that I'm really interested in, is getting more and more people to listen to these stories and to pay attention. Like, what are your thoughts about how we can do that?
There's a lot of ways, of course, to do that. First is just socializing, I guess, because here there's a, I guess the word would be big prejudice against indigenous people, that they're, uncultured or, well, underdeveloped, and just a generally bad image. And I think that's what we need to get straight first, because there's so many youth nowadays, especially, are leaving their villages, to go to the big cities to study, and then they never come back, which is a really, really big problem. And I guess one way is to just, to put it simply, is to instill pride back into their culture, to make them proud of their own culture, proud of their heritage, proud of their roots. Yeah.
Do you think storytelling could be maybe a way to do that?
Yeah, for sure, because storytelling is a wonderful thing, because if you have something to say, and storytelling is one of the best way to say it, and people will listen. That's the hope, that people will listen to the stories that we're delivering through these films or whatever medium, really, and so that they understand the message behind them too.
So tell me a little bit about some of the stories that you're telling.
Most of my films are about my indigenous community, my village.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a rather small village in the heart of Borneo Island, Indonesia, and the people in the village are from the Dayak Iban tribe mostly. And what I try to convey in the films is the importance of this indigenous culture, how the people in our village especially have carried on their tradition, their culture, and even until this day they still practice their ritual and still uphold their traditional values, and how important that is for I guess the future, because these culture values, they're very simple but at the same time really complex. One of the examples is how much we value the forest. We always take just as much as we need, never more, but never less. And that's very simple, very simple and understandable, but it's a message that also a lot of people need to hear nowadays. And I think by preserving these traditional values, we can also fight back against the major problems that we're having nowadays, climate change, and specifically to indigenous communities, displacement, and the destruction of their customary territory. By protecting these cultures, those problems can be averted, I guess. Yeah.
Who do you really hope listens to and watches the stories that you're telling?
Oh, that's a really good question. I guess to people who can, the people who I want to listen to my films, the people who I want to watch my film and understand the message, is people who can make a difference. And that doesn't mean just policymakers or influential people in a way, but I think everybody can make a difference. And especially now, just a week ago, I was in this indigenous community upstream of the Kapuas River, and right now they're fighting to get their rights recognized. And when we were there, I showed my film to them, and the film was about our community and our fight to get that recognition. And when we were showing it to the community, they were, I guess, inspired by our fight, and made them want to continue what they're doing even more. And as a filmmaker, that was really really touching for me, I guess, that what I'm doing is making a difference in a way. And it's just really incredible feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is so incredible. And this is something that I've been thinking about too, is how can we tell stories that inspire action and inspire hope, especially when we're thinking about things like biodiversity loss or climate crisis, which can be really scary. And those stories can be really sad stories a lot of the time. So what do you think about how we can tell stories that do just that, that inspire hope?
Well, my community is, I guess, one of the best examples of an indigenous community who has in a way won their fight. It's still a long way to to it, but it's a major first step. But many other communities, many other countries even, are heavily affected by the impacts of climate change and the state of the world right now, especially due to the pandemic and etc. And I guess what we are here to do is to offer hope in a way, to show an example of what can be done if we stick to our fight, if we stay persistent. And well, yeah. Um, uh, I think our story can help a lot of people in their fight to continue what they're doing. But there's also not too long ago a community in central Kalimantan who one of their customary leaders was arrested and dragged out of his house for defending their customary territory from a palm oil company that has already ravaged more than half of their entire customary territory. And there's many sides to it, of course, but there's how do I say this? Our community is the side that wants to offer hope, that wants to show what the future can be for all of us.
What does that future look like for you? What should the future look like?
Well, the biggest problem that we're facing now is, of course, the climate change, and that has already affected so many people, displaced so many people from their homes. And the future that I would want is, of course, one where that has been furthered, where we have reduced our carbon dioxide output and etc. And I guess one way to do that is to protect our forests, because as cliche as it might sound, the forest is the lung of the world. That is an undeniable truth. And of course, there's many sides to this, because stopping climate change, there's not one single solution. We're all fighting the same war, but just on different fronts. But also the major problem that we're facing with indigenous communities especially is that there's still major prejudice, of course, but we're also getting our territory are being taken from us. The land that we've been living on for hundreds or maybe even thousands of years is being taken from us, being destroyed and taken for commercial gains. And through my stories, I hope that I can somehow in a way help that, because so many people, so many lives, I've said this a couple of times already, but it's been affected by this, and it's a major issue that more people need to be aware of.
Yeah. Kynan, where can we see your stories? Where can we see your films and your
well, you can find it on the If Not Us Then Who YouTube channel. There are some of my films on there, and also on my Instagram I post a lot of my pictures at Kynan Tegar. Yeah,
that's perfect. We'll definitely share that and make sure that everybody watching has access to those links. Thanks so much for making time, Kynan, and thanks so much for all the work that you do. Keep it up.
Thank you. Really great to be here today.
My name is David Hernandez Palmar. I'm from the Wayu people from Venezuela and Colombia. My people are in both countries and right in the northernmost part of South America. And yeah, I'm a photographer, producer, and storyteller.
How is your work relevant to climate solutions?
Storytelling is one of the most effective ways to not only to have a say in the big conversation regarding the climate change, but also like to make more visible what are our contributions in terms of not only the adaptation or adapting to climate change, but how we have sorted it out, through all these years, and when you think about the impacts of climate change, but also like it gives us a glimpse from within how important are also the languages worldwide, especially indigenous languages. Like because of climate change, there is less vocabulary because we're being forcibly relocated, or then there is no longer that food or that medicine, and since it doesn't exist anymore, you cannot call their names of those items related to the land or territory that we live in. So I think storytelling is a way not only to call down attention on that issue, but also like a way for you to be woke and aware that storytelling is very much rooted and linked to your land, and that is affected by climate change too. So as a result, you are losing also knowledge. That is why, again, storytelling is way vital, is very important.
Could you tell me more about just some of the different stories you've told and some of the films that you've made? I think of Owners of the Water from 2009 as one of them. And for those who don't know, Owners of the Water's focus on really a campaign to protect the Amazon from uncontrolled soy cultivation.
In that very moment, I just wanted to have my friends and my people to have access to technology, or for them to be able to tell stories, right? But nowadays, I think I have a more an updated, thought about that. Like, for instance, indigenous or rural communities have a direct impact on the construction of knowledge, because we're a potential scientific community that we are not necessarily depending on individuals, university, or institution to generate data on which species exist and their conservation status, right? So it means that we have an autonomy to carry out studies. So that is why storytelling and environmental management, environmental issues around storytelling are necessary for conservation science. But in this case, this storytelling comes directly from those of us who live in the territory. In this case, we are living in the tropical dry forest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing that's so interesting to me about the storytelling that you do is that while it might be often focused on indigenous communities, there are people who are beyond the communities who will learn from the stories, will hear the stories and benefit from them. And so one thing I wonder, from all the work that you've done, how do you tell stories, or how do storytellers that you've met tell stories that like aren't just listened to by indigenous people, but that are listened to more broadly by broader audiences?
Well, I am convinced that the more local the story, the more universal it becomes. I mean, this allows us to access to a larger audience that can not only feel and change their minds, right? Because between us or amongst us, we know what is the commitment that we have, right, with our communities. But also, I think storytelling can begin, or can be a space that we can begin to build a consensus, and they need to follow the knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the, well, maybe the word is not the right one, but I think it's for the very salvation of living beings and
right.
the planetary ethics, right? So I think that continue to facilitate spaces like, this, where we can debate about storytelling and climate change, can help the stories to reach the people who need to know these stories. And one good thing is that, the people's narrative is endless, as long as it is vital force for what we need. What we need is support to amplify our voices and knowledge. So I think also it unfolds the very notion that, that sometimes people think that we are voice of the voiceless, and actually it's not like that. all peoples have their voice. The thing is that sometimes I don't want it to be heard, or sometimes I don't want to be leading in the big conversation. So that is why that, you know, we are doing this.
You mentioned people being seen as voiceless, and I know that oftentimes communities that are seen or perceived as voiceless like might feel less empowered or less capable or less worthy of sharing their perspectives. So was there any work that you had to do to help people understand that their voices and perspectives and stories mattered? And if so, how did you do that? How did you get people to share more of their stories if they weren't feeling like they wanted to share those stories or like they could share those stories?
I'm the executive producer to a film called Semillas de Lucha, Seeds of a Struggle, that was shot in the Afro-descendant community of Ecuador in Esmeraldas in the big region of Chocó. And they say, you know, I don't get this, why you're bringing, you know, such a practice like cinema. Cinema is meant for white privileged people. And we are not even, you know, good looking, right? And we're trying just to sort it out by, you know, facing scarcity, you know, no access to running water or food or anything, you know, all the realities that we face as peoples. And I said, well, I think there is something that we have to build, which is hope. And I think, you know, recreating or, you know, doing storytelling can, you know, ease the pain, but also can be a way for you to heal, right? All the wounds that we have because of the system. And yeah, what I really appreciate about this, the director of this film, Nahuel, who happens to be a Mapuche filmmaker who lives in Ecuador, he's based in Ecuador, is that all the community took part in the script writing and you know, like how to shape the story. So at the very end, they said, well, now we know that cinema or storytelling, it is a human expression, meaning that it is a human right. And now we know that we can do a storytelling, we can do cinema. So for me, it was really meaningful because it is also to recognize that storytelling can be used on the behalf of the peoples, by the people themselves, right? What makes me think, you know, one reality out there is that you know, I think that at the local level, you know, as a reflection, I feel that the barrier that we might find, you know, once we do storytelling is the prejudice that they do have against our storytelling, you know. I mean, you know, the privileged people, right? But at the same time, I think, you know, as an audience, you know, as audience, you know, African descendant, indigenous, campesino people were very numerous. Yeah. So, but I think, you know, the intersectional things are also taken for granted with respect to the privileges and inequalities that exist in the global North and in the global South relationship. So I think that very testimony or that very example that is shared, that is a confirmation that more reciprocity is needed. It's not copying and pasting. It's about reciprocity. And when there is the reciprocity in the very art, in the very fact of creating stories, the more effective it becomes. And I think, you know, that's a moment when people, they feel empowered. They say, well, I'm part of this story, telling my story worth, and I want my story to be encompassed, you know, forever, you know.
Why are those stories beneficial to those audiences that might not normally know about them?
Most of the story we have heard or, you know, enjoyed or even learned from so far, they have taught us to feel that we're not linked to any territory. They have been really effective to enable us, you know, to refer to an ancestry, So I would say that watching this storytelling creations, you will have a link and a connection, and maybe you can ask yourself to who you're rooted to or to where you're rooted to, right? But also, like, for the very first time, you might find that out that everything is interconnected, right? There was this really good friend of mine who is an astronaut in NASA, and she said, "I hope I can bring all the eyes of humankind and humanity up there, so they can see from not only from the very perspective of science, because it is an scientific fact, but also just because of the very exercise of staring from up there to Earth, you can realize that everything is connected. So the storytelling of peoples regarding climate change can give you a chance for you to feel and to realize that everything is interconnected. And that's why it's so vital and important for you to enjoy these creations.
David, what would you recommend for the people who are watching to do as a next step when it comes to their engagement with storytelling?
Call for action would be like, there are good storytellers, from the region you are from, and, they need your support. I mean, they need support, not because we don't have the right to have solidarity with other people in other regions worldwide, but I think, as you are supporting these storytellers, you're supporting us too, because we feel like we are a network, right? I would say that that climate change is not only, finding out who is accountable for what, or for this reason, or defects or whatever. It is also like, be aware and be accountable, and how you can support, storytelling. There are a lot of initiatives that I can recommend and I can refer to. But I think the most important also is like, like being critique about what governments or maybe a lobby are doing against other indigenous peoples and other peoples, worldwide with, for instance, U.S. sanctions. If you speak up and do something where others remain silent to nothing, that's really important. For instance, my people in Venezuela, we're having a hard time because of the U.S. sanctions, right? And there's a storytelling where there's a narrative there that it's all because of the government that is ruling right now, which is not totally true in terms like, their default, but, U.S. sanction has worsened the thing. So I think, my recommendation, or a lot, my point will be like, be more open to narrative that comes directly from territories. That is the best way for you to have access to real content, the real McCoy, the real content that is made with hope, that is made with feelings, but above all things with honesty. I think that would be the best recommendation I can do ever.
So my name is Elizabeth Wathuti. I'm an environmentalist and a climate activist from Kenya. And I'm currently the head of campaigns and Daima Consortium Coordinator at Wangari Maathai Foundation. And apart from that, I'm also the founder of Green Generation Initiative. And this initiative nurtures young people to love nature and to be environmentally conscious at a young age. And of course, it's greatly inspired by the story of my life, how I grew up in the Central Highlands of Kenya and how I grew up in the most forested region in Kenya. Because for me, I really got the chance to connect to nature at a young age, got to love nature, spent a lot of time in nature as a young girl. And I think all these memories are the ones that shaped me into being that environmentalist, and also shaped me into being that person who really wants to make sure that nature is doing well despite all the challenges with human activities. I've started a campaign that I dubbed Adopt a Tree campaign, to make sure that every child in every school in Kenya gets an opportunity to plant and adopt a tree each in their school compound. And of course, for me, every time I get into a school with the tree seedlings, I can see the love for nature from these children. I can see the enthusiasm, I can see the energy that they really want to be part of the solution.
I can see already how you are inspiring so many other young people to take ownership and to realize that they too can be an essential part of the solution. I hear a lot of stories on repeat in different spaces and places, whether that's working with business leaders or working with students in the classroom. And often when it comes to climate change, those stories sound something like, I'm too small to make a difference, the future is out of my control, it's not up to me, I'm not smart enough, I'm not experienced enough. And in large part, I think a lot of those inner stories that we subscribe to about our role and about the wider world come from the fact that many of the stories about climate change, about the environment, about social justice are wrapped in this kind of doomsdayism, you know? And I know that I only have to go on Twitter for 5 minutes and feel incredibly depressed after it, because the information is so negative, and because I'm more likely to see that negative news than I am to hear the story of someone like you, Elizabeth, who is doing such incredible work. So from your experience, how do we create stories of hope and possibility and opportunity that are in fact more compelling and invite more people to the table than those of the kind of doomsday and dystopianism that I fear a lot of young people are now kind of falling prey to?
I think one of the ways that we can really focus on is to make sure that we tell the success stories and really amplify the success stories, because it is from those success stories that the other negative stories where people do not kind of believe in themselves, they will feel empowered to understand and know that there are people that are doing it. Yes, they might feel like they're too small to make a difference, but once they listen to these success stories of people who once felt that way, but today they feel differently, then they're going to also feel empowered to understand that they can make a difference.
As a storyteller and as someone who has been so successful at campaigning and getting your way into schools and inviting lots of young people to the table, what would you say are some of the essential tools that we should all use to be more effective storytellers and to challenge some of those negative stories?
One tool, I think, for me is to focus on your passion, because once you tell a story of what you're passionate about, you don't even have to think widely. You know, it just comes from deep within you that you're telling people something out of something that really greatly inspires you. It's deep down in your heart. And this is what really helps us also get people to have that natural call to action. It doesn't have to be a duty imposed upon them, for example, to protect the environment. It's something that comes from deep within. Like I go to a place and find them cutting down trees, and it pains so much. So it feels that passion is really one of the tools that we can focus on. Have other people who inspire you, and listen to other stories that can really shape you, because we always learn from one another, and it's not always okay to believe that you can learn from yourself. I mean, we have to learn from one another. We have to learn from stories of people who did it before. And when we learn from stories of how they did it before, then we are going to be able to shape the narrative in today's world, because I know the world is also changing by day, but we can change the narrative by also learning from other people. And then the last thing is that never be ashamed or afraid to tell your story to the world, because there are millions of people waiting to be inspired by you. There are millions of people waiting to listen to that story, because you never know who is listening, and you never know who you will get to inspire. And then that person you get to inspire will, in the end, continue inspiring other people. And the chain will keep growing day by day.
I really found my sweet spot and my passion, as you said, in storytelling and campaigning and inviting different people into the room. I'd love to hear, as a final question to you, Elizabeth, who do you feel currently is not invited into the room when it comes to storytelling, when it comes to trying to deliver climate solutions?
I think in the conversation around the climate and ecological crisis, the grassroots vulnerable communities are not yet in the room. Well, some are, but we don't feel them in the room. We don't give them that needed opportunity. And we need to also begin to see them, not just for the challenges they are facing by being the most vulnerable to climate change, but also see them for their solutions, because despite the fact that they are the ones that are hit the hardest by the climate crisis impacts. They are the same people that are every day trying to work on solutions to make sure that they adapt to the impacts of this crisis. But you will not get to hear some of these stories because we've not yet brought them to the table. We talk about some of the impacts that they're facing, but how about we begin to hear from them? We begin to hear from them that these are our challenges and this is what we are doing on. How can you help us maximize on the impacts? Because the grassroots people are working on so many solutions, but unless we tap into their solutions, finance them, support them greatly to make sure that their solutions are actually making a huge difference nationally and also, internationally, then it's going to continue being challenging for them. I know it's always a question about, they are the ones that have to go through the loss and damage when there are floods, when there is, when there are crop failures caused by, the existing weather challenges. I mean, when there are crop failures caused by the extreme weather conditions that we're facing today, these are the people that will have to go through the greatest challenges. But they are not sitting down and waiting for a savior. They are not sitting down and waiting for us to help them. They are working every day to see to it that they can give something to their families, to see to it that they can get water for their families. And I'll give a good example. Look at the women. When it's dry during the drought season, they will not sit back and wait for the food to come from nowhere. They will walk for long distances to go and look for water to feed their families. So they need us to empower them. They need us to bring them on the table so that they can tell us their challenges, and also we can listen to their solutions, because we are no longer looking for solutions. Solutions are everywhere, and they're everywhere and being worked on by these grassroots vulnerable communities. So it's just a matter of thinking around how can we begin to work together to maximize on some of these solutions that are already happening on the ground, because there's nothing new that we are going to start inventing. We have to focus on the solutions that are already existing and then maximize on them. And by that, we will have halfway solved the climate and ecological crisis.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your wisdom, for your contribution, and all of the incredible work that you are doing every single day. Whenever I feel a bit despairing about the future or downtrodden about the current situation, I think about you and I think about the work that you're doing. So I'm really, really excited for lots of other people to meet you virtually and to learn from you today. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Hello, it's me again. Thank you for joining us as we listen to those four incredible storytellers and changemakers and activists. From Kate, we heard that storytelling really needs to be foundational to the environmental movement and to change making in general, and that we need to make space for narratives that have enough room for multiplicity in order for them to be compelling. From Kynan, we heard that storytelling can be used as a tool to amplify voices that aren't often heard and to motivate and inspire action and demonstrate what better futures can look like. David shared with us that storytelling is really a way to link people and land and knowledge together. One quote that really stuck with me from David was how the more local the story, the more universal it becomes. Storytelling is necessary for connections to our own roots and to the interconnection of all things. And from Elizabeth, we heard that we could tell stories to specifically empower young people so that they know that they can make a difference. But really, we have to start by learning from those who came before, by listening to and by supporting people on the grassroots. And I think from all four of our speakers today, we really heard that creating space for a diversity of perspectives and ways of knowing and ways of being, building space for more just understandings, making sure that we're supporting and uplifting the people on the front lines and on the grassroots, and considering and listening to those who are not in the room. These are all critical parts of building this global environmental narrative and in building a global solutions narrative that I think this session and really this whole conference is trying to get at. So I'd like to leave you with this. It is all of our responsibilities to steward, shape, and support justice-grounded narratives for environmental action. And to do this, we need to amplify voices, build understandings, and listen to each other, because we're all needed in this better, more resilient, and more just future where everybody can thrive. Thank you for joining us today, everyone. I look forward to chatting with you more in some of the other sessions during this conference. Take good care.